This is the Shattering the Taboo podcast. Let's change the paradigm together with your hosts, Austin, Aesthetics, and Bebe Chez.
Welcome to another episode of Shattering the Taboo podcast. I'm very excited to be here. We're going to be talking about men's mental health stigma. This is part 2. And there were some sound issues at the beginning, so we just introduced this recording, and we're going to start it off right now. Enjoy. First, and I want you to think about when you were a young child. And if I think about my 2 children, I was sharing with Jaime earlier that I find that my daughter is a lot stronger. It's a lot more emotionally and mentally tougher to really navigate through different elements of life. And I find that she doesn't depend as much as my son for comfort. That comfort that we sought as children has been shown to neutralize the damaging effects of stress, the difficulties that may arise in life. And so as we get older, we may learn in our own household that we should be tougher, that we should be stronger, quote unquote, that we should suppress certain feelings. Other times I see, especially boys, the kind of mama's child kind of syndrome, where mom really, and this happens in my household with my son, I see it often, my wife does this, that she caters to him a lot, she coddles him a lot. And so my son hasn't learned yet the tools that he needs to really survive as a man in the world. So what happens? Now you get older and you may have never learned that. You may not be in a relationship that allows you to have that kind of support. Maybe you have somebody older that's that kind of support, but oftentimes we may not have that. And so when I was working with this one particular male, I saw those struggles, and nowhere did I see him really looking for comfort. I didn't see him connecting, as Austin mentioned in the last podcast, which you can talk about again, which is that connecting with that female side. And so he wasn't being vulnerable. And so I told him, look, I suggest that if you can, share more with your spouse. I find that my spouse was actually very important for me, because once I met her, I was really a child. I lost my dad at a really young age. And then my mom really wasn't a source of support. And so when I became a so-called adult, I was really a child in many respects. So I really struggled. And I didn't have the know-how to really navigate. I had to almost figure it out myself. And it really forms the basis of a lot of what I teach and what I call the Life of the DJ and Wellness program, where this kind of self-developmental program towards holistic health and spiritual awakening, where I had to really figure it out all myself. And it wasn't until I met somebody else that I had in my life regularly that sometimes I could lean on to troubleshoot, to help me figure things out. We don't have to figure everything out. And another thing that we can touch upon later, and I'll break here for if anybody wants to come say anything or share, is that being vulnerable is okay, and looking for help is okay. And the other thing is that getting help, especially in the mental, emotional arena or spiritual arena, will only make us stronger. Because for us to develop and grow with purpose, we need to be aligned with our dharma. We need to be healthy, both physically and mentally. And so if we're not physically and mentally strong, how are we going to undertake the deeper voyage? The voyage within, let's say, if I'm on the spiritual inclined side, or how am I going to be as successful as an entrepreneur? And so I'm working with this entrepreneur it really gave me this vision where I saw as he's talking, he's in his early 30s. As he's talking, I could see the boy struggling with manly duties and how much stress that brings upon him. All right, let me take a break there. Go ahead, Austin, and then I'll have Jaime jump on. If you have a question, of
Yeah,
course, chime in.
you brought up a lot of good points. I just wanted to say real quick about connecting to that female side and the anima. I had a really good space with George going into the anima. That may be on his Twitter if anyone wants to go back and look for that. But one thing I didn't mention when talking about connecting to that female side is the anima actually serves as the relating function. So it's pretty much how we relate to anyone, female or male, even family members. So to be emotional, to be vulnerable, it allows you to connect with not only the opposite gender, but any human being in the world. When you're both on the same page, both vulnerable, you can really connect with each other. And that's why it's important. You also mentioned that how you're an older guy, but it's never too late to learn these things or to improve yourself. Like, I see 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds in YouTube comments on like self-help videos and motivational videos, like talking about how they're making changes. And that inspires me as a young, early 20-year-old because sometimes I feel like I'm behind, but then I see these older people like 30s, 40s still improving themselves, and it's like, nah, man, no matter when you start, as long as you're getting better every day, it doesn't matter how old you are now, you can still improve, you can still get to your goals. And even if you're older, you need to have that emotional control because look at what just happened at the Grammys. All right, everyone saw Will Smith, everyone knows what just went down. That shows me a weak man. Even though he came in and he slapped Chris Rock and he was violent, that looked weak to me. Will Smith was weak in that situation because he lost control of his emotions. And he may have looked strong and won the battle in the moment, but Chris actually won in the end because you saw the next day Will was apologizing. He got his reward taken away. He was embarrassed. He regretted that, losing his cool. So men, especially, since we have that energy in us, that strength in us, we're a little bit more fight than flight sometimes. We really need to control our emotions and have that control because sometimes being the stronger man, being the better man is to not react, not get violent. And that was a great example that just happened on television for everyone to see. So, yeah, Jaime, you could take it away.
Yeah, I think that that's the perfect example of what happens when we haven't properly learned to cope with our emotional dysregulations and the darker sides of our psyche and being. I was just looking over like suicide rates in the U.S. and it's continued to climb since like 2016, 2017, especially amongst younger men. And men are also about 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. And that tells me that that's a fruit of a problem, an overall problem that we have with the way that we approach life, the way we approach learning and developing as young men. And it affects us years and years down the line in our lives. So I think it's just very important that we learn to regulate and cope with these negative occurrences and be vulnerable, as Baby Chez said, because if we're not, it has dire consequences. I see you have your hand up, Austin.
Yeah, great point about the suicide rates. And that made me think of this other podcast I listened to. I think it's called Man versus World on YouTube, by a guy named Mark Kweppet. Not sure if anyone's familiar with him, but he is someone I look up to. I learned a lot from his YouTube videos and whatnot. Mark Kweppet, if anyone wants to check him out, also known as Universal Man, talks a lot about men's mental health, helping men specifically, and all types of people, just with mental health, self development. So definitely recommend anyone interested in this topic to give him a look too on YouTube. Universal Man, Mark Kweppet, shout out to him. But he mentioned how when growing up, you always see like a lot of women get encouraged. You always see like women get encouraged, like, oh, you can do anything, you could be an astronaut, you could do this, because how women used to not have rights and stuff, they feel like they got to really push and say and like encourage these women to go above and beyond and like gas them up, hype them up in school and whatnot and in like the media. But men never really get that. It's kind of just assumed that a man can do things, but they never really tell you as a man growing up, like, yeah, men can do anything, boys can do anything. They don't really hype us up as much. And he was talking about how that kind of affected him negatively, and he believes that could affect men negatively, just like subconsciously. And so yeah, that's just something to think about that may play into like the suicide in a small role or something, man.
And to add to that, right, where we are at this point, especially in Western culture, where, like you're saying, it's all about like the women's empowerment. Um, but also, another thing is men are discouraged from showing that raw emotion, those tears. When you look at like um, expression of generally thought to be negative emotion, anger, sadness, pain, it usually comes out as frustration or violence, aggression in the media outlets that we are constantly bombarded with. You see that women can cry on camera, and it's like an emotional, visceral experience when you see that. But very rarely do you see like strong, typical male role models showing that soft expression, so to speak, right? I think we need to become more comfortable with that openness so that we're not dealing with these deep set wounds in our psyche. Um, and I think this ties in perfectly with what Baby Chez and I were talking about earlier today. Um, I recently was helping my uncle move. Um, he is in his early 40s, and he's had a fairly difficult life. He never, his dad left him when he was very young. I would want to say 8 or 9, and he didn't know how to cope with that. You know, as a young child, young adult, you're going with the flow. You're doing things. You're seeking substances or women or something, some pleasure in the world to distract yourself from that deep set pain. He had his mother in his life, but then in his mid 30s, she passed away very abruptly. She had cancer, and still, again, I think he just dove more strongly into his vices. Rather than taking the time to talk to somebody or to express it, he drove people away because he had already experienced that abandonment from an early age from a strong male role model, his father. Um, and that continued to compound over the last few years. And when his mother died, he gained the responsibility of taking care of his severely disabled uh, sister. She wasn't expected to live longer than 20 years, but she lived into her mid 30s. And it all kind of came to its precipice when she passed away last year. Um, and he took time off work when she got really sick, and that was kind of one thing that he dove into as well and derived meaning from and kind of distracted himself along with other things, smoking, drinking, other recreational drugs, and womanizing. He I think he realizes these things now. um, and it's all kind of come to the forefront. He's kind of upended his life. He's making a career change. He's moving states. But the main thing, it's kind of like the traditional midlife crisis. But the main thing that I derived and what I was very thankful for in the time that I was there, helping him move and communicating with him strongly, was his tenderness, his willingness to open up and discuss these tougher things that I could tell had been weighing him down and affecting him for many years. He talked about his dad, his story with his dad. He talked about his mom passing away, his failed relationship with my aunt. He talked about the passing of his sister, and these things, like he couldn't hold back the tears anymore. He had come to that breaking point, and I'm thankful that it didn't come to a different conclusion, right? Where he's seemingly losing his whole world that he's worked all his life to maintain, doing that introspecting, and he's expressing now, and he's comfortable talking with me, somebody who's much, much younger, right? But we're talking about these uncomfortable things, and I could see it, I could feel it, I could feel the weight just move off of him as he let these tears out of his, and he's like, look, and he even tried to justify it. He's like, man, look at me, I'm just like, I look so dumb, like I'm like weak right now. And I'm like, no, you're not weak, you're the strongest when you're vulnerable, when you're allowing yourself to process these things. You've been holding on to this for so long that it's had a great impact on who you are as a person. um, so I think that like gleaning the information from that circumstance, of course, like being involved in it, I may be able to garner more information from it, but just expressing it and telling it as an example of like how healthy it is to actually let go, to actually just let go, let the things that are holding you back out to somebody. It doesn't have to be here, it doesn't have to be now, but find that person, even if it's just like a stranger walking down the street. I know that's a pretty asinine claim, but it's very healthy. It's very important. Find somebody you can confide in, because if you don't, you're gonna crumple under the weight of the world. Um, it's it's the only thing that we have is us. Austin, I see you have your hand up, man.
Yeah, man, amazing point. Like, at the end of the day, we all need someone to connect with. We all need a friend. Like, to be psychologically healthy, you need a friend or two just to relate to, just to, like, know other people can relate to your struggles and you're not in life all alone. When you're isolated and alone, that's when you really get lost in your negative thoughts and they can spiral downward, especially if you're in a situation like you were mentioning where there's no father figure or a strong role model that you can like look up to. You really need some friends at that point to come and sort of fill that role and give you something to look after, like something to model yourself with, because a lot of men these days, they don't have that strong father figure, and traditionally the father was always the head of the household. Like, the sons would follow his footsteps, they would even take the same job as him, learn a lot from him, learn their game with women from him, things like that. And to take that away from a man, that's a very big developmental thing that they're missing. But the beautiful thing about technology these days is you can find sources like this podcast, sources like Mark Kweppet, people who are actually trained like therapists and things to help men out and people out, and then they can sort of fill that role if it's missing with social media by teaching themselves and finding other people to place that role. It doesn't have to necessarily be a biological father, but it could be a mentor or a role model. So even if you're missing that, you can still fill that fill that gap, even if it's just by reading books or something. But yeah, Jamie, what's up, man?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this ties in perfectly with what Baby Ches mentioned earlier about his son needing that role model. And if you look at nature itself, humans are social creatures. Like, I know that like independence is something that we're taught. And I think this is a stigma as well. Like, the man is supposed to be austere and able to handle all this adversity and all of the things that happen in this life. But if a child is born and then has no support system, it will die. So I think this is a super important that we need to cultivate a support system in order to remain healthy and in balance. And with that, I'll let you take it away, Baby Ches.
Yeah, that's why I think that I got into the space because it's a male dominated space. I know the vulnerability and the problems that we struggle with. Me, I didn't grow up in technology as much as a younger generation, but I still was exposed to video games at a pretty young age, from the Atari. That's pretty sad that that was my first, video game system. But as I grew up, I didn't grow up like cell phones and all this kind of stuff, and so I know the troubles that can surface because of technology. I was having a conversation recently with a group that I was doing like a presentation for on technology and neurological problems such as autism spectrum disorder and attention deficit hyperreactivity and also Tourette's. A lot of these are like energetic dysregulation, problems regulating my own energy. And I was having this conversation with that person I was working with yesterday because I'm having him shift completely the way that he goes about his day, the way that he sets up his desk to open the door more for breaks, and to allow for the body to let the energy move. Men are meant to roam and explore and move, and movement is very important. That's why sports can be so critical at a young age for a young male. The Boy Scouts of America as well. The other thing is, with regards to something that was brought up earlier in terms of emotions and crying, there is no difference between laughing and crying. They're exactly the same experience on the same continuous spectrum. If you examine the sounds, the expressions, oftentimes you can cry tears of joy or of sadness. They all related to each other, but we tend to view one as negative that we suppress. But both are immensely healing. I did a tweet some not too long ago, and I can like do a session on this on the neurochemistry of laughter and the healing properties of laughter. But at the same time, we ignore the neurochemistry of crying, of sadness, and the healing properties of letting go of burdens and letting go of these emotional, energetic charges. And so I remember when I was very young, when I started this journey, I was probably like 19. I remember going through this period where I cried. I had bouts where I would cry for sometimes an hour at a time, and hour here, an hour there. It was just like all of this energy I had built up throughout my life that maybe I hadn't expressed. I just said, you know what? I'm on by myself. I'm in college. I'm thinking of different things. I'm thinking of things differently, and I just let it all out. And it was like a very healing experience because it allowed me to let go of a lot of weight. I've shared before, maybe for some people who haven't heard this, that's what ended up killing my dad because he never unburdened himself. He never valued that deeper healing. He became very successful, but never made it to a late age to enjoy the fruits of his labor. And it's what I want people to avoid in this space. I don't want people to be very successful, reach 40 and 50 and be living in pain and not be able to enjoy. And that's what I see with clients, that when they reach their 40s, you see the buildup of what they've done. And my dad never let go of emotions. I never in my life saw my dad cry. And rarely would I see him be emotional. And it ended up building in him what is very common in males, which is an emotional hypertension, like a bottle that's been stuffed and stuffed and stuffed, and it's about to just burst. And so he had this high blood pressure. He got like a moment where he was coming out of court, high blood pressure really hit him, and he had an aneurysm, a weakening of one of the walls in his artery in his brain. He had a headache. He sat down. He had to go to the hospital. They found the aneurysm. They had to fix it because otherwise he'd be vulnerable to strokes. Never made it back from that surgery. And so the moral of the story here is that was a great guy, loved by many. When he passed away, his funeral was loaded with hundreds and hundreds of people because he was known in Puerto Rico, where I grew up, an island, and he helped a lot of people. But at the same time, he never cared for himself enough. He was never taught that. And therefore, the things that we're not taught, we need to learn. And that's why being in spaces like this, like Austin mentioned earlier, reading a good book, finding some sort of resource, somebody that can teach you. And that's why I decided to kind of build out this wellness holistic program for this space because of that reason. Because I want to build like a resource, and the OGs will be able to get into this private Discord, eventually into an NFT collection. I'm going to be building it out really special as I grow this, and it will be like a journey to take people on so that they can do whatever they're meant to do. Because in my opinion, and I've seen this throughout my 20 plus years being in education at every level, I worked deeply in the mental health field, educating about neuroscience, about other topics. And I know one thing for certain: everybody has a genius, but life often suppresses it, beats us down, and doesn't allow that genius to manifest. And my gift to the world is to build that program out where you can go in and you can discover what your inner genius is and let go of everything and learn the techniques that can bring that holistic wellness back to you so that you can go on that journey. And the mental health part is absolutely crucial now more than ever, because males in particular are more at risk to the damaging effects of how society is now. Number one, no nature. There's nature deficit syndrome. Number two, technology. We spend too much time idle, and that seated position starts a process of what I call decentralization. I start to become a lot more disconnected between who I am and my nervous system, my disembodied part and my embodied part. And so that lack of movement, that lack of exposure to nature, the lack of often support, the lack maybe of knowing how to navigate through that mental emotional landscape is really puts the male more at a disadvantage. If you examine females, they tend to have that kind of community role, that kind of partner connection kind of more. They reach out to their others more. I know with my wife, with me, she'll always be apt to let her emotions out, to talk about things, to really, sometimes, in my opinion, I feel like they'll talk about it a lot more than it should be spoken about. But then I realize that maybe that's just me. Maybe I need to be talking about things as much as she does, because maybe I haven't resolved the issue, and I think I have. Sometimes we kind of move on and we leave a lot of unresolved issues stored in the banks of our subconscious mind. It's like a bag that just keeps wearing on us. I did a little tweet with a cartoon where there was this guy walking on the road and he was pulling all these huge boulders, and the boulders had different things written on them. It was all the things that he had gone through, all the things that made him who he was in the present. And there were people on the side of the road judging him, criticizing him, not knowing all the things that that person was going through. And oftentimes we go through that. We live like that. Like we have all these things that we're carrying and we just don't let them go, and they're holding us back. We need to set ourselves free. But if we don't know how to do that, then we need to get help. Education is changing. It's now more than ever should be a la carte. You have a dream, I want to be the dream maker. I want to be the one that helps make dreams a reality by building an educational system that allows people to become free of the crap that they don't need and to start having a vision of what they should do, and then find a way to help that person make it a reality, whether it's funding, whether it's collaborations, making that dream a reality, especially for, if it's done in an NFT fashion, which nurtures that connection, that community, that bonding, that mastermind aspect, the connection, being able to serve the holders, etc. There's prime opportunity now in this space for us to really use technology to our advantage without forgetting the things that a male needs to be able to be healthy and successful, like reconnecting with nature, etc., etc. Go ahead, Jaime.
Yeah, and I think that you touched on something that's very, very important when it comes to like the education, right? We're not cookie cutters. We're not people that are just meant to all have the same educational system and the same upbringing. Like you said, it should be a la carte because I think it was Albert Einstein that said if you tell a fish to climb a tree, it's not going to do well, and it's something of that nature. But I think we all understand that. But everybody has that genius in them, and this is important because it ties back into that stigma of people are just, and I think this is in men in particular, is people are um, in school and in career paths that they're not choosing for themselves. They're not doing things that they're passionate about. They're in a system that they feel that they have to be in order to either be monetarily successful or to gain the approvals of of their family members or people around them, and that in turn leads to this sort of like emptiness because I believe, like you, Baby Ches, that we all have our own genius, and that has to do with our deepest desires from within us and what we want to pursue and what we want to accomplish in the world. And if we feel like we're not doing that and we're just working to work and live a life that is pleasing to others, this could be very heavy and depressing and sad.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Let me paint a little picture. I have a student that for some reason it's a she, not a male in this case, but she always comes to mind. I don't know why. She gave me an aha moment when it comes to this vision that I have, that I see education going that will allow us to really untap that inner genius. That I agree that it's somewhere buried deep inside, and oftentimes we have had experiences that have created so many barriers for that to be able to express itself. And then you compound it by putting people, which, as you mentioned, aesthetics, people aren't cookie cutter. So like the ideal way, for example, to teach yoga is not to just go and give a class that's like to everybody, just a standard class. It's actually to do it a lot more specialized. But the yoga that we have, at least in the West, in America, it's more like a gym. It's more like an exercise form. It's not really what yoga is. And so I see this one student, and she's a representation of what's wrong with the system. She struggles with mental health issues because she is immensely talented, but she has all this energy going all over the place. She doesn't know how to express it. She's very decentralized as well. Her energy is almost like not really grounded in her nervous system. She's almost like, imagine if she were like a balloon and is just inflated out into the atmosphere around her and not really concentrated on the core of her being. But the system perpetuates this. Parents that they themselves are ignorant, don't know how to guide the child properly. Her school system that is designed to perpetuate an industrial machine that benefits the few, that is not really teaching her the skills that she needs to excel, and to at the same time have a system in place for her own healing journey. And so, how can we have a society that doesn't have as part of our educational and developmental system healing as a core component? Not healing where you have to spend exorbitant amounts of money to access it, but part of the educational system itself. So, a system where if a child needs to get up, to walk around the classroom, they have the liberty to do so. Maybe there's a separate room that's a Zen like room where in the middle of the class, everybody takes a break and has quiet time or movement time or meditation time, what have you, things that will help them. Or also, of course, counseling, group counseling, or coaching, or things of that nature. The educational system that we're moving is going to do away with what we currently have, which is an inflated debt based system that is supported by these big, powerful universities that put people in debt and teach them mostly things they will never use. So we have a base that is not helping us, that is perpetuating problems from the past, and we don't have a system in place that allows us to heal. I'll be doing a spaces tomorrow that I highly suggest you guys show up if you can at 2:30 with the Sun Gens, where I talk about this concept that I created called eco wellness, and you're gonna get a feel for how every single system that humans have created is unnatural. It's out of line with nature. And again, we talked about this in terms of mental health, men's mental health, is how critical nature is to our well-being. As a society for at least 2,000 years, if not much longer, males were always going with father figures out exploring, foraging, hunting, climbing. And these type of activities, this is how they learn. They learn through movement. We don't learn seated. And we have to learn that ability to sit and rest, which is what meditation is. It's sitting, resting. When a teacher sits in a forest ashram, all the students need to be able to sit for extended periods, not just to learn from the master, but also to learn in their own inner research. And if I never learn that, I'm going to really struggle with these more advanced practice. That's why I espouse, and I'll let Austin talk now. I always espouse this dualistic journey, this yin and yang approach, not just using technology and then using the ancient wisdom, but at the same time, taking advantage of what West has to offer in their advancements in mental health and couple that with Eastern approaches. Because the Eastern approaches are very difficult to master if I am Westernly hurt or affected. All right, go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, that's a great point. And going back to another point you made about how sometimes the parents or the systems in place really benefit the child may not know what's best for the child. I wanted to bring that up again because we talked about how important a father figure is and a role model is, but at the same time, it's bad to have no father figure, but if you have too much of a father figure or you like copy them completely, you only do what they want instead of what you yourself want, or you're not really independent, don't have your own identity, that's not good either. So you don't want to go too hard into leaning into somebody where you idolize them too much, or you don't really think for yourself. Like someone mentioned earlier, some people are going to college for something they don't really want to do. It could be something their mother or father wants them to do, or what society wants them to do. But part of being a man, part of being any individual, is doing what you want for yourself, what's best for you, not comparing to other people or doing what you think other people will like, but doing what you know is good for yourself. And that's what the beauty is when we have all the technology of today, where we can kind of choose our role models, we can choose our father figures and make them be people who speak to our own goals. So like they say, you can't choose your family, but you can choose who you look up to in that way. And that's the beauty, because a lot of people, they see it as a disadvantage when they don't have a strong father figure. Like they may have one, but it's just not a good person, or it could be an abusive person, like a bad one. But it could be a good thing, because then it forces them to think for themselves. It forces them to figure things out themselves, and that'll make them smarter than someone who has their own, like everything just laid out for them, like their own path laid out for them, because they're going to develop intelligence to think for themselves. So like sometimes these disadvantages can be good things and make you a stronger, smarter person. So look at it that way.
Yeah, before we
Yeah.
continue, let me see if anybody wants to come up and share anything, or Igor that's here already as a speaker. Feel free. We're family. It will, we're all here to learn from each other. So if you want to come up, just request, and feel free to share or ask questions. Take advantage of these moments. All right, go ahead, Jaime.
Yeah. I think both of you have brought up good points and something that I touched on earlier. Um, Baby Ches, you talked about how the system that we're in, especially in the West, has been constructed not for the advancement of the people, but for the advancement of the few. And I think the reason that we see so many mental health problems within men in particular is because we're bridled. We're trying to gain notoriety in a system that is not meant for us to thrive in. I look at like the people or the things, historical figures that I look up to, and they were explorers and men that went out and just created something or did something that was their goal, their purpose, their sole being. And that's not how our society has been garnered. It's something that has put us in a box and said, "Hey, you need to do this. You need to pursue that. You need to learn this way." But all of my heroes have blossomed because they went out against their established society at the time and explored for themselves and learned what they wanted, listened to their inner voice, and they ended up making an impact in the world because of that. So I think that another stigma that should be broken down is to not conform. Don't just be content with being successful in a system that's not even designed to be something that nourishes you deep down. Um, Go out and take chances, take risks, and do things that challenge you and that you really want to do. And that's the most important thing in life. I think everybody should just constantly be reminded of that, constantly be encouraged to do that and to walk out in faith, step out in faith, and just go for it. If you want to, I saw a TikTok somebody sent me earlier, and it was a guy that was just digging a hole, and he was like, if you want to dig a hole, go and dig a hole. If that's what makes you happy, that's what's going to make you happy. We overthink, thinking that people are going to be worried about us or judging us. But oftentimes, if we're just minding our own business and trudging on forward, they're going to be happy knowing that we're happy doing what we're doing. So if it's digging a hole or if it's building a pyramid, whatever it is, go out and do it and pursue it ardently. And all of those problems that come from idleness or the lack of exploration or the lack of purpose will fade away because you're so laser focused on building something that comes from the depth of your being that you won't have time. You won't want to. Those things will just fade away. And you'll be walking in purpose, walking in faith.
Exactly. Yeah. If you go to India, you'll notice that they do exactly that. Like there's so many people that will just do what they want to do. They'll express their faith in the way that they want to express. Nobody criticizes. That's a beautiful part that you'll see. You may see a naked sadhu walking around or a guru just in ecstasy, and here in a state of like um, higher consciousness. And it may look to, if that person were walking on the street here, let's say in New York City, most people would think that they're crazy. But over there, they're seen as illuminated free spirits. There is a really fine line. I've seen this as I've studied and worked with people, talented people, as well as people with mental health struggles. There's a very fine line between genius and insanity. And so I see this a lot with artists who are very gifted, that they can oscillate between moments of peak performance and moments where they're just really struggling. And yesterday when I was working with that client, it was like that. He has these roller coaster moments where he'll have these highs where he feels really good and he's doing well, and then he'll have these lows where he's just out of control and really frustrated and struggling and not coping the right way, maybe coping with alcohol or something, or overeating or what have you. And oftentimes we don't cope well. Oscillating with those extremes can be make us much less likely to reach our endpoint, our goals. And therefore, finding that Zen road It's almost like I did that tweet last week, I think, about gripping the this. It's an art of like gripping the tightrope. To be able to walk on a tightrope, you have to be very centered and you have to be very focused, because if you sway one way or the other, you go to one extreme, you're going to topple, you're going to fall off the tightrope. And that's how life really is. It's really hard. We're not taught how to become these tightrope walking masters, and that's why we stumble and we fall off the rope. But the key here is, how often are we going to get back on that rope? And how often are we going to be practicing the art of walking that middle path? And so, if our educational system worked with parents, we could actually tailor it better for younger children. Because as a parent, I wasn't able to accelerate, for example, my daughter's growth and her talents if I hadn't taken the time to sit and get to know her. And finally, one day, I had an aha moment where I realized what her genius was by studying her and seeing what she was doing. I saw this is what she was meant to do, and I need to find a way to make it a reality for her. It's almost like I was practicing for what I wanted to do for others. And so if if as a child nobody did that for us, then who's going to do that for us when we now are adults and are expected to do it ourselves? Then it's only us. And oftentimes I find people will get stuck ruminating about the past. It's just, I am like this because I have this trauma from the past. Or my mom did. I mean, I had a lot of trauma from growing up. My parents weren't perfect. And I noticed that effect in the way that I, for example, raised my own kids and how I reacted to their struggles. And so, but at some point, we have to take ownership over our struggles, start doing something about it in the here and now, because it is only in the here and now that healing can occur. And once I take that voyage in the here and now, I can now start to make my life a reality. I move away from this cause and effect, I'm a product of my past mentality. And now I live in the eternal now, and I do things to quantumly change my future. I'm not living a Newtonian life. I'm living an Einsteinian life, staking claim in the now and making my future exactly what I want it to be in the now. Go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, great point. I love how you mentioned that with your daughter finding her inner genius, like what she was meant to. Oh, hold on, my mic cut off. I was saying you mentioned with your daughter how you found her inner genius was just by simply observing her, watching her, and that's a great point because I said earlier like you don't want to follow a role model too much. You want to find your own inner passion and pursue that. But some people may not know what that inner passion is and struggle to figure it out. Well, a great way to think about it is to look back at what you enjoyed doing as a kid, what you did that made the time go by quick, where you just entered that fun flow state. If you look there, look at the things that you did or that you do just simply for fun, you may find your passion there and your purpose, find a way to make a career or something out of that or just pursue that. So that's good advice for people to look at. You can't just force it. You got to look back at it. And another thing is when you're a kid, the reason children can find this is because they'll just be flowing, trying out different things. They're not really still like us, like how Bebe mentioned. We sit a lot. We're still. We're not moving. When you're moving and you're in motion, you're going to get different experiences and interact with different things. And the more you do that, the more variety you have, the better odds you find that passion, you find that thing. So if you haven't found it in your past yet, instead of looking back at what you did in the past, you could also just start trying out various different things, taking risk, putting yourself out there, and eventually you'll come across that passion.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add a couple quotes that I think are very pertinent. One is, man cannot discover new oceans unless he has the courage to lose sight of the shore. And then another is, only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. And I don't think that we're suffering from a lack of anything. I think it's the opposite. I think we're suffering from an excess, especially here in the U.S. That's always going to be my point of reference. The United States. We're like overwhelmed, and we don't take action because of all of the comforts that surround us, and so we never set off. We're always doing these self-regulation things, and like, oh, this happened, and oh, this is my trauma, and I'm holding on to it, rather than just going, rather than just exploring, rather than just doing. We sit and we say, oh, we wallow in our own pity, and and that's never going to be the solution. We have to take that action, like Brian or Baby Chess said, like you said, Austin. Um, we just have to go and do and motion ourselves so that we can, make something out of our desires.
I find that there's a lot of entrepreneurs, males in the space, that they're so goal oriented, and if things don't go the way that they want, they really struggle. And so it doesn't have to be like that. You don't have to have that goal to have to say, oh, by this time point, I need to be here. We need to learn to enjoy the voyage so that um, we can really experience life in a richer way. Oftentimes, we want to go from point A to point B. I'm poor, I want to be rich. Well, if your whole journey from being poor to rich was miserable, then it really wasn't worth it. If I go take a trip and I'm absent-minded the whole time, then I missed out on a big chunk of life. And oftentimes we go like that. We go through like this hypnotic or zombie state, and years go by, and then we look back and we're like, holy crap, where did my life go? That's why there's something called the midlife crisis. And that's what I want people to avoid. Is I want them to find what their dream is earlier, so that they don't have to reach the middle of their life, let's say, and be like, man, what have I done with my life? And I'll leave you with this one last thought, which is, I want you to think about you as a child. Let's do that right now. Just take a moment, close your eyes, and visualize yourself as a child. Just take a time, really see it. See what you look like, maybe what you were doing, what you're wearing. See yourself there. And I want you to now imagine that that child is standing right in front of you. You, the younger you, is standing right in front of you or seated at your feet, gazing at you. And try to experience that. See it. And I want you to now think about what that child is thinking. Think about the things that you're doing with your life, your decisions, your actions, etc. Are you right now the role model that that child would have looked up to? And if the answer is no, or maybe, or somewhat certain things, then what are the things that are keeping you from being the role model that you deserved all along? And so that type of voyage and exercise really taking your life and treating it like a business where you sit and you plan and you take time to nurture yourself. It's important. We can't be going grinding away, as we'll see on Thursday when I talk about how an overactive brain and stress will shorten your lifespan, backed by research, by the way. Then we need to take time for our own well-being, for just the mere fact that I am alive, that I can breathe, that I can experience. That's good enough. We get so lost in making something, doing something, filling ourselves up with so many things that often we don't even need. And so let's go on that journey. Take that time, do that exercise. Every week, see if there's progress. If that little child, that little you is looking up and saying, whoa, I like that. I like where you're going. I like what I'm seeing. And I know that a lot of things about me throughout the journey have not been things that the little me would have been proud of. However, one of the things that you should be proud of is that, at least for me, nobody taught me those things. I almost have to learn them on my own through experience, through making mistakes. And so it's fine to not judge yourself and to say, look, it's fine. I'm not perfect. I have these struggles, and that's absolutely fine. Everybody has that. But we need to recognize that in the now, we have all the power. Every time that I do like a breathing technique, I was looking at I look at people's faces, I hear their voices. I'm becoming much more sensitive by teaching in this space to hearing like people's energy levels, different inflection points, certain details about sound that I never was aware of. And when I was working with this one person and we did a breathing exercise, I looked at him and I instantly saw a difference in him. He was super relaxed in a completely different state. And I told him the following: I didn't do anything. You did that yourself. You created that state. And therefore, at any point, you can tap into that, change your brainwave activity, change your chemistry, and change the entire game of how you're programming your DNA right now. You can change the way that the software of life DNA is operating through your body by changing the way that you act, think, live, breathe, etc. in the here and now. And so I'll be teaching that as I go through this concept that I created of DNA hacking, where very interesting topic. So those are the things you want to keep in mind as a male. The power is within you. We need to find balance. We need to reconnect with nature. We're going to try in this space, at least I'm committed to doing that, to create technological approaches that try to mimic some of nature while we as a society heal nature back, because we've destroyed it as a society. It needs to breathe again. It needs to heal. The Mother Nature needs to get better. And while we're doing that, we can use technology for a better purpose, not for instilling addiction, for addictive behaviors as it's been done up to now. A lot of gambling, gaming, different activities that are just stimulating the same pattern I'm already seeing emerging, and we're going to use it in a different way. Take that time, get away, take a step back. It's called, I'll be teaching this at some point, this kind of course for like entrepreneurs and busy people. Take an approach called the Pomodoro technique, where you can be a lot more productive in shorter bursts with intermittent micro breaks for your own well-being than to grind through for 3 or 4 hours and then take a break. Those 3 or 4 hours are going to change your chemistry so drastically that the 30 minutes, hour, whatever time you take afterwards are just not going to do, especially if we're not doing the techniques that actually, the practice that actually help us. So keep that in mind in your journey. There's going to be a lot more good stuff to go. If you're not following myself or Aesthetics or Austin, then by all means follow us so you can be up to date with what we'll be doing. There's a lot of great stuff coming. And so you'll want to be, a part of it if you can. All of these are going to be recorded. They will be available either on Twitter, or we'll obviously also have it on Spotify or other mediums. Okay, if anybody wants to come up or has any wrapping comments, we will wrap up this episode 5 of Shatter the Taboo podcast.
Yeah, I think this was a very, very productive discussion that we've had, and I'm glad for everybody who stuck around and joined in. So thank you all for tuning in with us today, and we really appreciate you. We hope to see you next week as well.
Yeah, thanks so much, everyone. This was a great one. It's always fun talking with you two guys, and thanks for everyone listening, because your guys' question and y'all being here, it makes it worth it knowing that we're reaching people.
I leave you with a peace out, friends. Take care.
See ya.